Pope Francis has been known to say that God is a God of surprises, that our God is a God who surprises, working in our lives maybe in unexpected ways that should enable us to trust in the Lord even when it's difficult, because he's a God of surprises. We see that throughout our readings here today. So in our first reading from the prophet Isaiah, of course, the bulk of the prophets all have to do with the exile in Babylon, before, during, after. So the same is true today. And in the exile, of course, the people, especially all the leaders of Jerusalem, of Israel, were all sent to Babylon, and everyone else just sort of had to scatter. The temple was destroyed, the town was destroyed, and so people are just scattered, including even into the desert. But what do we hear today is that the Lord is going to be present and make a river of water flow into the desert. In the barrenness of their lives, he's going to send the Holy Spirit. He said, "See, I am doing something new." At the beginning of that passage, he goes, "You remember when I parted the Red Sea and then all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh were just sort of wiped out, and wasn't that all amazing? Well, just forget about it, because I'm going to do something even better. I'm going to do something new." The people, after all those decades of being scattered and in exile, had to have thought that, kind of like with us, when we go through something hard for so long, maybe we think that's just always how it's going to be. But our God is a God of surprises. And he said he was going to bring new life to his people when they're out in the wasteland. We heard that in our psalm response as well, right? Like when it was written after the exile. It said, when the Lord brought back the captives of Zion, it was like we were dreaming. This whole thing was a dream come true. We just maybe even given up hope that we could ever go back again. But God reminded them that he wanted to continue to bring them to deliverance, enable them to rebuild their lives in the temple so they could give worship to God. God is a God of surprises. So in a sense, the biggest surprise that God could ever give is coming as one of us. Like the Word through whom all things were made, the God of the universe took on our human form, being born a virgin in a manger in a small town in a backwater part of the Roman Empire, just like a human just like you and I, although of course fully God. That's surprising. This God who would then die and then rise from the dead, ascend to the right hand of the Father. Jesus is God's biggest surprise and biggest miracle to bring salvation to his people. And of course, we see this Jesus in our gospel today being surprising in a couple different ways. First, with this woman who is caught in adultery. Sometimes we think, well, where was the guy? But this whole thing was concocted just to trap Jesus. They didn't care about either. It was all just like a ruse, in their scheme. But in any case, standing there in the middle, she had to have thought, this is it for me. I'm doomed. Probably caught in a lot of shame and obviously condemnation. And the one who is the holiest person ever is standing before her. He says, go and sin no more. Forgiveness is not indifference. There's something new that the Lord wants to continue to bring us. So she would have been very surprised to find out, I'm not getting stoned today. But that opportunity was meant to lead to something new. That this surprising reversal of fortunes for her was meant to set her really, truly free, and to set aside the things of the past and move on to something new. For the scribes and Pharisees, too, Jesus would have been a big surprise for them. They continued to try to put him in a box and trap him, and he would just evade all their attempts to have him arrested. Even the presence of Jesus would have been a surprise for them, because the scribes and Pharisees, of course, we tend to think of them as bad guys because they were opposed to Jesus so much. They were well-intentioned. Of course, we know what they say about good intentions. But they really were so keyed in on trying to follow the law to the best of their ability, missed out on the bigger picture. In their minds, they were trying their best, but in that, they thought they could be righteous, they could be ultimately saved just on their own efforts. Like, if I follow the rules enough, and I follow the law enough, then, I'm going to make it happen for me. There's actually a heresy called Pelagianism that says that we can be saved on our own. And we don't need God, we don't need grace, we don't need mercy, we just do it all ourselves. Because we know in our own lives when we try to do things just on our own, it just never works out. So Jesus would have been a big surprise to them, who came proclaiming mercy and forgiveness and a newness that comes only from God. So then we can go back to St. Paul. Now the verses right before we heard, he's kind of like listing out his background a little bit. He goes, I was a Hebrew of Hebrew origins, from the tribe of Benjamin. And in regards to the law, I was a Pharisee. So again, he's like, he knew his stuff, and he did his best to follow it. He goes, and as far as the commandments goes, I was blameless. Kind of like the rich young man who Jesus says, you got to follow all the commandments. He goes, I've done these my whole life. That's kind of like St. Paul too. I've done all the stuff. St. Paul was a student of a rabbi named Gamaliel, who was the head rabbi in Jerusalem. So the top guy in the capital city. And Paul learned from him. He had a great education. Paul was also a Roman citizen, even though he was a Jew, so he had this special perk of being a Roman citizen. So St. Paul had all this great stuff going for him. He had the lineage, the heritage, he had a good education, he had these special perks, it was blameless in following the law, he kind of had it all together. But we hear that at the end he considered all that just loss, rubbish. St. Paul actually uses kind of a bad word. We don't have that translated, fortunately. But all that stuff he considers just nothing compared to knowing Jesus. You talk about surprises. Paul, who was on his way to persecuting Christians, of course, encountered the risen Lord in light on the road to Damascus. And it completely changed his life. Because it's Jesus who he is persecuting in his body, the church, had something more in store for him. St. Paul, would actually use his persecution of the church he'd wear it as a badge. Not as a badge of honor, but as a way of saying, here's how far Jesus has brought me and transformed my life. And he says that I continue forward, knowing that righteousness comes not from all my accomplishments and background and education and everything, but simply by knowing Jesus and trying to follow him. He even says in our passage, I don't have it all together yet, but I keep striving so that I can fully take possession of it. And I love what he says, because I have been taken possession of by Jesus. He would also write in Galatians 2:20, I live no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That's the only thing that mattered for St. Paul, who was writing all these words from a dungeon. Our God is a God of surprises. So too for us, when we maybe feel like we're stuck in this desert period of life with dryness and barrenness, and we too maybe are in a place in life where we're just sort of stuck in the middle of shame and condemnation. If maybe we get caught too much up in our past, whether that's good or whether that's bad. If we get too caught up in thinking we have to do it all ourselves, like the older son in the parable from last week, that our value is just based on what we do. When we find ourselves just too caught up in the things in the world that we're forgetful of God, our God of surprises can do something new and make us into a new creation. He's already made us into a new creation through our baptism. He wants to continue to to bring us back to that place. That's why we have this season of Lent moving into Easter, to remind us that we are a new creation through our baptism, and to allow the Lord to take possession of us more and more. It's just like the people who have been stuck in the desert for decades, that the Holy Spirit can bring new life to us also, no matter where it is that we're at. And if it doesn't quite happen here on earth, we know that our ultimate goal is that we're marked out for the fullness of life with the Lord in heaven. As we encounter Christ here in the Mass today, let us allow the God of surprises to take possession of us again, and to come into our lives and move in a new way, knowing that no matter where it is that we stand right now, we go forward from here with him.